We are back. It's John Pollock with John Ramdeen and Robin Black. Coming up this Sunday night, the UFC presents one of the most anticipated bantamweight title fights in history. I'll go so far as to say the most anticipated, as Dominick Cruz looks to regain the bantamweight title from TJ Dillashaw. Earlier this week, we had a chance to speak with Jon Anik, the UFC and FS1 broadcaster, with his thoughts on the main event.
You know, Dillashaw has finished his last three opponents by knockout or TKO, but all of them have come in the fourth round or later. You know, it's interesting. I've been on the UFC payroll for 4.5 years, and Dominick Cruz has fought for 61 seconds. And, you know, here I go on the podcast picking him to win the fight, yet it's really hard to know what you're going to get. You know, and part of the reason why I picked him is because I think, at least in terms of the self-belief and the confidence, this guy was Conor McGregor before Conor McGregor even existed. In terms of his style, you know, he's been doing this a long time, you know, with the footwork and the defensive priorities and trying to, you know, create angles for offensive opportunities, the head movement and everything else. You know, when you go back and look at the footage of Dominick Cruz in the WEC when he was at his most active in 2009 and 2010, there are a lot of similarities, granted it's a small sample size, to the guy you saw against Takeya Mizugaki over 61 seconds or so. So I do believe that Dominick Cruz has, as he's evolved, it's been more of a fine-tuning, whereas TJ Dillashaw has become a completely different fighter.
That was Jon Anik. That full interview is up at FightNetwork.com, discussing the main event with Dominick Cruz and TJ Dillashaw. Such a fascinating fight on paper. And I think with Dominick Cruz, a lot of why people are leaning Cruz is that they've been exposed to this guy's incredible intelligence when it comes to looking at different fighters, finding ways to break them down, and no matter what TJ Dillashaw poses for him, Dominick Cruz has that incredible reaction time to deal with any situation, and I think that is why a lot of people are looking at the intangibles of this fight and not so much the lack of activity over the last 4 years.
Yeah, and on top of that, he's got the experience. Look at a number of his fights. They've gone 5 rounds, so he has that in his pocket. In addition to that, he is a lifelong martial artist. He's looking for the truths of combat inside of the cage. He's got an analytical mind. He works with good coaches and teammates in San Diego. So, and on top of that, he was a champion in the WEC. He was a champion in the UFC. When all these issues with his health, he could have bailed, but he got through them. And, you know, I know fighters aren't 100% when they go into fights, but Dominick Cruz is one of these guys that can self-assess and self-assess properly. So for him to be in this main event, you know that he's ready to go.
Yeah, and he's also put in some psychological chips against TJ. He has. He's at least raised questions that in TJ's mind potentially can create doubts, especially if and when he has goods round 1 and round 2. Everything you said and everything Anik said is exactly right. Why are we picking this guy who's only fought, you know, a minute in 5 years? It's because he believes in himself, and we watch his analysis. We see how smart he is. I mean, Demetrius Johnson in 2011, Demetrius is 9 wins, no losses, and a draw since they fought, and he's fought Takeya Mizugaki for a minute and a bit. But so we aren't doing it because of his activity. We're doing it because of his mind, his confidence, and what we know he can do. There's one little hole in that armor for me, and that is the time off does affect you physically, and physical affectations are things that cannot be denied when they happen. And rounds 4 and rounds 5, that's what I want to see, if he can be as intense in round 4 and round 5 like we saw in the WEC, or if TJ, the super athlete, can take him in there, who has, as Anik pointed out, finished his 3 fights in round 4 or round 5. That's where TJ's at his best. I hated kind of hearing Dwayne say he's going to finish him in the second. I don't see that. Dwayne's smarter than me, but I don't see that. I see him hanging in there, making adjustments, trying to find a way, and if he's going to have his big moments, it'll be late in the fight. But at the same time, Cruz, man, micro learns so well. He doesn't just learn sitting at the Fox desk. He learns in real time in the fight. This fight is just so amazing. I'm so happy that analysis is kind of the hot thing right now instead of gossip. You've seen it everywhere. There's thousands of analysts out there, and that's a great thing. One thing we all have in common, we're just up our own asses on this one. We could talk all we want about all these different angles and all this different math. There's great analysis. Go check out BJJ Scout's analysis. Jack Slack always does brilliant stuff. But we're all up our own asses. You just have to watch it. We could talk about it forever, but you got to see it.
Are people counting TJ Dillashaw out because of the fact that, you look at where he was, he's achieved the success that he's achieved, going through the issues with Team Alpha Male, moving to Colorado. But I think people forget that now he's working with actual coaches opposed to just fighters learning how to fight, trying to go through this experiment. Now these coaches are breaking down details and adding those elements into the game, into TJ Dillashaw's game, something he hasn't had before.
I would be very worried if you took him and plopped him in with an elite wrestling coach, an elite jiu-jitsu black belt, and a great boxer, because these guys don't have a clue about fighting. Happens in the spaces in between those things. But Dwayne's in charge, and Dwayne will keep that thing humming right. He's going to look great. Part of the reason, like we said, why we're all picking Cruz is because of how smart he is and stuff. He's also convinced us. He's convinced us. All this talk has convinced us. But they still have to fight. We still got to see it.
It's coming up on Sunday night from Boston, Massachusetts. It begins with our coverage at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on Sunday, a full hour of us breaking down that card. And then the prelims are airing live here on Fight Network at 8 Eastern with 4 fights from the TD Garden. And then we'll send you over to TSN 5 for the main card at 10 Eastern, all leading into the main event involving TJ Dillashaw and Dominick Cruz for the undisputed Bantamweight Championship.